broken nurse, a silent man, and a voice that refused to let go. For 96 nights, Nora sang to a comatose stranger who never once stirred until the night she was forced to leave. What she didn't know was that he heard everything, and that her voice was the only thing keeping him alive. Months later, in a packed concert hall, he appeared with a message that silenced the world. Who was Caleb? Why did her song bring him back? This isn't just a love story, it's a miracle. Where are you watching from? Don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable stories. The hospital corridor buzzed faintly under the fluorescent lights, their cold hum a quiet metronome for the slow, sleepless rhythm of night. It was nearly 1 in the morning when Nora Hayes pushed open the heavy door of room 12B, cradling a dented portable speaker in one hand and a battered red notebook in the other. Her navy blue scrubs were wrinkled, the collar slightly frayed, and her brown curls, once meticulously pinned, now fell in loose wisps around tired eyes. She closed the door softly behind her with the same practiced quiet she had used every night for the past 96 days. And every night, the room welcomed her the same way, silent, sterile, waiting. Caleb Moore lay still in the hospital bed, arms at his sides, his face calm but pale. 32, the chart said, but the lines etched near his mouth made him look older. His beard had grown in unevenly over the past 3 months, and though nurses kept his hair trimmed, there was a messiness to him that spoke of someone who had once lived freely, boldly. His chest rose and fell in mechanical rhythm, assisted by machines and marked by the steady, stubborn beep of the heart monitor. Nora sat in the chair beside him, the same one she always took, the cushion permanently dented by her weight. She placed the speaker gently on the bedside table and opened the red notebook to a page near the middle. The paper was wrinkled, tear-stained in some corners, with verses scribbled in pencil and crossed out again and again. She didn't speak. Not yet. Instead, she reached forward and touched Caleb's hand, cool and limp beneath her fingers. She ran her thumb over the faint calluses on his fingertips, the small evidence of a past she didn't know but often imagined. No visitors ever came, no flowers, no photos, no get-well cards. Caleb Moore was a name without a history here. He had arrived with shrapnel wounds, head trauma, and no wallet. It wasn't until weeks later that they even had a name to go with his face. A war correspondent, someone had finally said, someone from a foreign aid organization, a journalist. No one claimed him. No one came looking. Only Nora stayed. That night, she wasn't sure she could do it. Earlier during her break, the charge nurse had taken her aside and, in a voice too professional to be comforting, informed her that due to ongoing budget cuts and staffing reassignments, her contract wouldn't be renewed. Tonight would be her last shift in the ICU. She hadn't cried then. She had simply nodded, signed the paperwork, and walked back down the long hallway. But now, sitting here in this room, looking at the man who had become her secret ritual, the tears finally came. She wiped them quickly and pressed play on the speaker. The quiet notes of an old jazz ballad filled the air, soft piano and slow horns wrapping around the stillness like a lullaby. Then Nora began to sing. Not loudly, not perfectly, but honestly. Her voice trembled on the opening line, but found strength with each breath. She sang a song her father used to hum when the world grew too heavy, and as she did, she watched Caleb's face. Still blank, still silent. But she sang anyway. For her. The final note faded, and she reached into her notebook, ripping out a page with jagged edges. She folded it and tucked it gently beneath his pillow. Just in case, she whispered. Then she kissed the back of his hand and stood up, taking her notebook, but leaving the speaker. As she turned away, the monitor beside Caleb flickered, just once with a subtle spike. Not enough to call attention. Not enough to make anyone rush in. But inside Caleb's mind, in the farthest corner of a consciousness that had not stirred in months, her voice echoed, soft, steady, and familiar, a thread pulling gently at the dark. Long before her voice ever reached the quiet corners of room 12B, Nora Hayes had once stood beneath stage lights, her heart thudding with the same rhythm her father's old metronome used to keep. Back then, she was a vocal performance student at Juilliard West, a girl who wore red lipstick and heels too high, who believed in curtain calls and endless possibilities. Music was her language, the thing that made her feel seen, understood. She dreamed of Broadway, of smoky jazz clubs, of late-night recording sessions where coffee and ambition flowed in equal measure. But dreams, as she learned, were fragile things. When her father's Alzheimer's worsened, Nora dropped everything, her final semester, her scholarships, even a regional tour offer, and returned home to care for him. She never spoke of it to the others at the hospital. To them, she was just the night nurse with the tired eyes and strange habit of humming love songs under her breath. But in truth, Nora had never really stopped singing. She sang in the shower. She sang when walking home under streetlights. And every night for the past 3 months, she sang to a man who never answered. Caleb Moore had been unconscious since the day he arrived. His body bore the scars of a bomb, shrapnel in his shoulder and ribs, nerve damage near the base of his skull. The paperwork that eventually surfaced said he was a journalist embedded with a peacekeeping unit overseas. His laptop had been destroyed in the blast. His passport half-burned. What little remained was a folded reporter's notebook filled with shorthand symbols and a tiny, waterproof drive no one had managed to access. The hospital administrators weren't interested in details. He was listed as a John Doe for almost a week until a contact in Geneva finally provided a name. But no family, no visitors, just the echo of war in his bones and silence in his room. And yet, something about him, something in the slight arch of his brow or the way his fingers curled as though still holding a camera or pen, called to Nora. She began by speaking to him, small things. The weather, the broken elevator, the new nurse who chewed gum too loudly. Then came the music. She brought her chipped paint-speckled speaker and played the songs her father loved, Ella Fitzgerald, Joni Mitchell, Chet Baker. Eventually she sang. Quietly at first, then with more confidence. Not because she thought he could hear her, but because she needed to remember how it felt to be heard. But maybe, just maybe, he had heard. Deep inside Caleb's fractured mind, sound had become color. Her voice didn't come like thunder or a shout, it came like rain on dry soil. A melody that slipped through the cracks of his pain and wrapped around his memories. He could not move, he could not speak. But her singing was the one constant, in a landscape of haze and weightless drifting. And with every note, something inside him stirred. Not enough to reach the surface, not yet, but enough to make the darkness feel a little less final. He remembered flashes. A boy laughing behind a camera lens, a woman's hands lighting a candle in a war-torn church, a field reporter's headset pressed too tightly over sunburned ears. But the strongest memory was her voice, Nora's, soft and sure, even when cracking. Especially when cracking. One night, long before she knew she'd be leaving, she cried while singing. Her voice caught on the word home, and for a moment, everything inside Caleb surged forward like a tide. He wanted to move, to speak, to tell her he was there. But he couldn't. So he listened. And hoped. The night Nora sang, Nothing Left to Lose, the ICU was quieter than usual, like even the machines had paused to listen. She didn't plan to sing that song, not at first. It was hers, scrawled in pencil across the back pages of her notebook, written on a rooftop one night after her father forgot her name for the first time. She had never performed it, not even for herself aloud. But when she sat beside Caleb for the final time, the weight of everything pressed down on her chest like a second heartbeat. Her hands trembled as she opened the notebook, turned to the page with smudged ink, and placed her fingers over the speaker's worn buttons. "I don't know if you'll ever wake up," she whispered, brushing a piece of lint from his blanket. "But I need to believe someone hears me." Then she sang. Her voice was breathy at first, raw and exposed, but as she reached the chorus, something shifted. The words poured out like confession, each one anchored in a pain she no longer knew how to silence. And somewhere in the middle of the second verse, Caleb's right index finger moved, just a twitch, small, involuntary, but real. No one saw it. The monitor beside him registered a subtle uptick. His heartbeat, once steady like a metronome in the dark, fluttered just slightly above its baseline. Nora didn't notice. Her eyes were closed, her voice cracking on the bridge, her throat tightening around the line she had always feared to speak aloud. "If I disappear, will anyone remember the sound I made?" The final notes drifted into silence. She didn't wait for an answer. Instead, she leaned in, kissed his temple gently, and whispered goodbye. Later that night, the heart monitor beeped again, faster this time. Caleb's eyelids trembled, barely perceptible, like a dream trying to wake. In his mind, her voice had become more than a sound. It had form, color, gravity. It reached deeper than the pain, past the war, past the loss. It gave him something to anchor to. He remembered her laugh, the way it curled at the end when she told stories about the man in room 9 who insisted on calling every nurse Captain. He remembered the faint scent of vanilla and something floral, lavender, maybe, when she replaced the flowers beside his bed. He remembered her crying. That night, more than any other, etched itself into him. Her tears had fallen onto his hand. He had felt the warmth, the weight, and something inside cracked open like ice beneath spring water. He began to dream again. Not the scattered, fractured images of war zones and firelight, but full memories. His mother's voice, the jazz bar where he met his first editor, the notebook in his coat pocket he had once sworn he would protect with his life. And then, the nightmare. The man from the alley. The last story Caleb had chased before the blast. A name he'd been warned never to print. He remembered the meeting in a backroom cafe, the whispered threat, the flash of light, then nothing. Until Nora. She had brought him back, piece by piece, word by word, note by note. The next morning, he woke. Slowly, painfully. The light burned. His throat felt like sandpaper, but his eyes opened and the ceiling came into focus. The nurse on duty screamed, then called for help. Caleb tried to speak but could only form one word. Sing. The nurse blinked, confused. I'm sorry? He tried again. His voice rasped like broken glass. The nurse, who sang. Oh, she said softly, her eyes widening. You mean Nora? His chest tightened at the name. He nodded once. I'm sorry. She continued. They let her go yesterday. Budget cuts. She didn't want to leave. Caleb closed his eyes, but in the quiet that followed, her voice returned. Not a memory now, but a vow. He had come back, and now he would find her. He had to. 2 weeks later, Caleb stood in front of a brick apartment building with cracked window frames and a chipped green door, clutching a thin scarf in his hand. It was gray and soft, faintly scented with lavender. Nora used to drape it over him on cold nights in the ICU, carefully tucking it around his shoulders as if he could still feel. And maybe he had. Maybe that warmth had reached deeper than the machines ever could. He looked up at the second-floor window, the one with wind chimes made from mismatched spoons, and imagined her sitting just behind it, flipping through a notebook, humming under her breath. He knocked. No answer. A neighbor coming down the stairs stopped, looked at him, then pointed down the block. She moved out a couple weeks ago. No forwarding address, the woman said, before disappearing with a grocery bag swinging at her hip. Caleb stared at the door for a moment longer, then knelt. He folded the scarf gently, slid a small note beneath it, and placed both on the welcome mat. Thank you for singing to a heart that thought it was dead, the note read. You saved me, whether you meant to or not. He didn't sign it. Later that night, he sat on a park bench with a cheap burner phone, headphones in, listening to a psalm on loop. It was a recording, fuzzy, unpolished, but unmistakably her voice. The same voice that had sung to him in the dark. He'd found it on a forgotten SoundCloud account linked to her full name, buried under years of digital dust. Only 3 tracks existed. The first was the song she sang the night she cried, the one that broke him open from the inside out. He closed his eyes and let it play over and over, like prayer. Then, with his hands still trembling from recovery, he emailed a small music foundation in Los Angeles. The application was already filled out. He'd found a draft of hers in the hospital system's archives. All he did was polish it, attach the track, and send it from a new email address. Anonymous. No return contact. Just a subject line. This voice deserves to be heard. 3 days later, Nora opened her inbox and froze. She'd been scrolling through job boards half-heartedly, still stunned from the abrupt end of her contract. She'd applied to dozens of clinics, even considered leaving the city altogether. Singing had become too painful, too tied to memory, to silence, to a man who would never wake up. So when she saw the email, "Congratulations, you've been selected as a finalist for the Reverie Foundation's vocal initiative," she assumed it was spam, until she opened the attached PDF. Her name, her photo, a perfectly written personal statement she had never submitted. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as if the whole thing might disappear. In the following days, things only grew stranger. A lease agreement appeared in her mailbox for an apartment she'd never seen, closer to downtown near a music school. The first 6 months paid in full. No sender, no explanation. When she arrived to see it for herself, the keys were taped to the door with a tiny tag that simply read, "Welcome." Inside, the fridge was stocked with almond milk, strawberries, a loaf of her favorite sourdough bread, and on the windowsill, a tiny bottle of lavender oil. She stood in the kitchen and cried. Not because she was afraid, but because for the first time in years, she felt like maybe, just maybe, someone believed she was worth more than surviving. The email from the boutique label came a week later, an invitation to a private audition. No promises, no pressure, just a quiet message. "We heard your voice. It stayed with us. Please come sing." And so she did. On the morning of her audition, she wore her mother's silver locket, placed the old red notebook in her bag, and took the speaker she hadn't touched since that last night in the ICU. She didn't know who had heard her song, but someone had. The old concert hall glowed with a kind of warmth that felt untouched by time. Velvet seats worn soft by decades of stories stretched out beneath golden chandeliers that swayed gently with the evening breeze. Backstage, Nora stood in the wings, her heart hammering against her ribs like it had something to say. The stage lights were dimmed, the crowd murmured with quiet anticipation, and in her hands she clutched the microphone as if it could anchor her to the moment. She had sung in smaller venues before, open mics, school showcases, but this was different. This was her first public performance since everything changed. She stepped onto the stage without fanfare, no spotlight chasing her, no voice calling her name, just her and the piano. As the opening chords of A Case of You filled the room, she closed her eyes and let the music carry her. Her voice started soft, almost a whisper, threading through the still air like smoke. But with each verse, she grew stronger. She wasn't just singing the lyrics. She was offering them, like petals laid at the feet of something sacred. Her memories, her grief, her hope. By the final note, the room had fallen into absolute silence. No shuffling, no coughs. Just breath, suspended in awe. She bowed quickly, blinking back tears, and turned to leave the stage when the event organizer stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Before we continue," he said, his voice echoing slightly, "someone special would like to say a few words." Nora froze. From the opposite wing, a man stepped into the light. He moved slowly, carefully, with a slight limp. His frame was leaner, his hair shorter, and though his face carried the tiredness of healing, his eyes, those steady, familiar eyes, locked onto hers. Caleb. He held something small in his hands, a wooden frame. Nora's breath caught, her knees weakening beneath her as he approached the microphone. The crowd shifted, curious, hushed. "I'm not here to give a speech," Caleb said quietly, voice steady but low, like a note struck in the deepest part of a piano. "I came to thank the woman who once sang to me every night, thinking I couldn't hear her. But I did. Every note, every word." A gasp swept through the audience. Nora brought a hand to her mouth. He continued. She didn't know she was saving a life. She didn't know her voice was the only thing holding someone together. But it was. It held me. He turned the frame toward her. Inside was a folded, yellowed piece of paper. Her handwriting, her note, left under his pillow months ago. "I hope, even just a little, you felt loved." The room was so quiet it felt like the world had paused to listen. "If you ever sing for the world," Caleb said, stepping closer, "let at least one song be for me." Nora couldn't move at first. Her breath trembled. But then her body did what her heart had already decided. She walked to him. Her steps quick, unthinking. She wrapped her arms around his shoulders, burying her face in the crook of his neck. The tears came fast, unguarded. The audience didn't clap. Not at first. They simply stood, as if they knew applause would break something fragile. And then one by one, they began. Soft, reverent, a wave of sound that felt more like gratitude than celebration. Caleb held her close, his voice barely audible in her ear. "I came back for you." She pulled back just enough to look at him. Her smile, streaked with tears, held the weight of everything they had survived. "I knew you'd hear me," she whispered. "I sang because I believed you did." Their foreheads touched, and the lights above them dimmed. It wasn't a perfect story. It never had been. But as they stood there, wrapped in applause and the echoes of a song that had once been whispered into the dark, they knew it had always been real. And real was enough. Life lesson from the story. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the greatest power. The Echo Between Us is not just a story about music or healing. It's a reminder that love doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it appears in whispered songs, small acts of kindness, or the silent presence of someone who refuses to give up on you. Nora didn't know if Caleb could hear her. She had no promise of reward or recognition. But she showed up, night after night, with nothing more than her voice and her heart. And that was enough to awaken something long buried. Caleb, too, didn't return for applause. He returned because someone believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. This story teaches us that even when we feel invisible, what we give to the world still matters. Our actions, our words, our love, they ripple outward, often reaching people in ways we'll never fully understand. Healing doesn't always come with answers. Sometimes it begins with showing up. Sometimes it begins with a song. So whatever you're holding on to, your art, your truth, your story, don't stop sharing it, because someone, somewhere, may be listening, and it might just save them. Now we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? If this story moved you or gave you hope, don't forget to subscribe to our channel's Soul-Stirring Stories for more unforgettable tales that remind us of the power of compassion, resilience, and connection. Until next time, keep listening, keep singing, and never stop believing that love can still find its way back.